Nobody is going to announce this. There will be no press conference, no emergency broadcast, no politician standing at a podium with the honesty to say what is actually happening to your money right now. That is not how this works. That is not how it has ever worked. The greatest financial heists in history have never been committed with a gun. They have been committed with a policy. They have been committed with language so deliberately technical, so intentionally opaque, that the average person hears it and nods politely and walks away with less than they arrived with, and never once realizes what happened. Right now, in March of 2026, the United States government is quietly doing something that has no honest name in any official document. They are erasing $39 trillion in debt, not paying it, not negotiating it, not defaulting on it, erasing it. And they are using your savings account to do it. I call this the silent erasure. And most of you watching this right now are funding it without a single signature on a single form. Let me teach you exactly how. The number itself has become almost too large to be taken seriously. As of this week, the gross national debt of the United States stands at $39 trillion. It crossed $38 trillion in October of 2025. It crossed $39 trillion in March of 2026. That is $1 trillion added roughly every 5 months. The Congressional Budget Office, in its February 2026 outlook, projected that the federal deficit will reach $1.9 trillion in fiscal year 2026 alone, not the total debt, the single-year addition. And by 2036, at the current trajectory, the debt held by the public is projected to surge to 120% of gross domestic product, eclipsing the previous all-time record set just after World War II. I want you to sit with that for a moment. We are on course to exceed a debt burden that the United States last carried in 1946, when the entire industrial capacity of the planet had just been destroyed and America was the only factory left standing. We have no such excuse today. But here is the number I want you to understand above all others. It is not the total debt. Totals are abstract. They are monuments. They do not move people. What moves people, what should move people, is the interest payment. In the first 3 months of fiscal year 2026 alone, the United States government paid $270 billion simply in interest on money it had already borrowed. $270 billion in 3 months. That number is not the principal. That is not buying anything new. That is not building a road, funding a school, paying a soldier, or feeding a child. That is the cost of having borrowed before. And for the first time in the history of this republic, that interest payment exceeded what the United States spent on its entire national defense during the same period. The nation that spends more than the next 10 countries combined on its military is now spending more on its credit card bill than on its army. The Congressional Budget Office projects that net interest payments will exceed $1 trillion for the full fiscal year 2026. $1 trillion every year simply to stand still. This is not a warning sign. Warning signs come before the disaster. This is the disaster, already in motion, already accelerating, and the music is still playing. I want to teach you the physics of why this cannot be solved the way most people believe it can. Because when I sit in Omaha and I read the proposals, the budget plans, the debt ceiling negotiations, the task force recommendations, I see the same fundamental misunderstanding repeated over and over by very intelligent people. They believe this is a political problem with a political solution. It is not. It is a mathematical problem with only 3 possible exits. I call these the 3 doors, and 2 of them are permanently locked. Door number 1 is austerity, the honest door. The government stops spending more than it earns. To balance the federal budget today, right now, in 2026, the government would need to cut total federal spending by somewhere between 30 and 40% immediately. Think carefully about what that means in human terms. Social Security payments cut by 1/3, the military budget reduced by 40%, Medicaid unfunded, Medicare restructured overnight. I have studied economic history for 7 decades. I have never once seen a democracy vote for its own suffering at that scale. It does not happen. Door number 1 is not merely difficult. It is politically, humanly, structurally impossible in any timeline that matters to the mathematics. The American economy has been built, wired, and architected around the continuous consumption of government debt. Removing it abruptly would produce a deflationary depression that would make 1929 appear gentle by comparison. Door number one is locked. Door number two is hard default. The president walks to a podium and says the United States cannot honor its treasury bonds. In a world where every major bank on earth holds American government debt as its foundational risk-free collateral, a default does not merely embarrass the United States. It makes every bank in the world simultaneously insolvent. Credit freezes, supply chains stop, international trade collapses. The global financial order, which has been built on the assumption of American creditworthiness for 80 years, vaporizes in a matter of days. J.P. Morgan, in a recent analysis, called this scenario implausible, precisely because growing doubts about treasury bonds are already visible in the bond market, and a formal default would accelerate those doubts into a complete collapse of the system that America itself built and benefits from most. The United States controls the printing press. It will always print before it formally defaults. Door number two is also locked. That leaves only door number three, the door that every empire in decline has walked through, from Rome to the Weimar Republic to Britain after World War II. The soft default, the silent erasure. They will not refuse to pay you back. They will pay you back every single dollar you are owed, but they will pay you back in a currency they have quietly, deliberately, systematically reduced in value. They will print the difference. They will tolerate inflation. They will manage it. They will enable it. And they will use your savings, your bonds, your retirement accounts, your cash holdings, as the mechanism through which the real value of their debt is transferred off the government's balance sheet and onto yours. J.P. Morgan has said this directly in published research. The path out of the debt burden likely involves elevated inflation and, in their exact words, eroding Federal Reserve independence. This is not a fringe theory. This is the analysis of the largest bank in the United States. Let me explain the mechanics of this with the precision it deserves. The system that is quietly erasing the debt operates through three interlocking mechanisms. I call the first one the captive buyer. In a free and honest market, when a borrower is drowning in debt, lenders demand higher interest rates to compensate for the growing risk. The United States government cannot afford higher rates. At current debt levels, every 1 percentage point increase in average interest rates adds approximately $390 billion to the annual interest bill. If rates were to rise to 8 or 10%, the levels you would need to genuinely fight entrenched inflation, the interest expense alone would consume the entire federal revenue within a decade. So the government does not allow the free market to price its debt honestly. Banking regulations, written under the language of safety and prudence, require banks, pension funds, and insurance companies to hold United States Treasury bonds as high-quality liquid assets on their balance sheets. Your 401k, your pension, your insurance policy is not purchasing government debt because it is the best available investment. It is purchasing it because the regulatory structure effectively mandates it. The government has created a captive audience for its own borrowing, and that audience is your retirement. The second mechanism I call the manipulated compass. If you are going to erase debt through inflation, you must ensure that the public does not fully perceive how high inflation actually is. You must manage the measuring stick itself. The methodology for calculating the Consumer Price Index, the official inflation number that governs wage adjustments, Social Security cost of living increases, and bond yields, has been revised dozens of times over the past 40 years. Every single revision, without exception, has resulted in a lower official number. They use substitution bias. If the price of beef doubles, the model assumes you switch to chicken. If chicken doubles, you switch to eggs. They are measuring the cost of constant downward adjustment, not the cost of maintaining your standard of living. They use hedonic adjustments. If a new car costs $5,000 more than last year, but comes with a better infotainment system, the official methodology argues that the price did not truly rise because you received a more valuable product. The result is that an inflation rate your body feels as 7% appears in the official statistics as 3.5%. This suppressed number does two things simultaneously. It reduces the cost of living adjustments paid to Social Security recipients, saving the government billions. And it keeps the bond market calm by convincing investors that real returns are positive when they are, in fact, deeply negative. The compass has been recalibrated. It no longer points north. It points wherever the Treasury needs it to point. The third mechanism is what I call the Fed's fused hand. For decades, Americans were told that the Federal Reserve was independent, that its singular mandate was to maintain price stability, to fight inflation, to protect the purchasing power of the dollar. That independence was always conditional. It was contingent on the government's debt being manageable enough that honest monetary policy was politically survivable. When the debt reaches this level, the Federal Reserve faces a choice with only one survivable answer. If it raises rates aggressively to genuinely extinguish inflation, the interest expense on $39 trillion accelerates toward numbers that destabilize the entire fiscal structure of the United States government. The Fed cannot raise rates to truly fight inflation. It must tolerate inflation. It must enable it. When private buyers of Treasury bonds demand higher yields to compensate for devaluation risk, the Fed steps in and buys those bonds itself, printing new digital dollars, injecting them into the financial system, artificially suppressing the yields that honest markets would have set higher. This is why the stock market reaches record highs in an economy where working people feel poorer. The new money enters the system at the top. Banks and financial institutions receive it first and deploy it into assets, equities, real estate, private credit. Asset prices inflate. If you own assets, your net worth on paper rises. If you sell your labor for a wage, the money reaches you last, and only in the form of higher prices at the grocery store and the gas pump. This is not an accident. This is the architecture. The Federal Reserve's hand has been fused to the government's budget, and the printing press is the hinge. Now, I want you to understand something that most people are not connecting yet. I have watched every major financial cycle of the 20th century from a front row seat. I have watched empires manage their debts in exactly this way. And I want to tell you what history teaches about where this path ends. Not because I want to frighten you, but because I believe the only honest response to a person I respect is the complete truth. In 1933, Franklin Roosevelt did not ask Americans to surrender their gold. He issued Executive Order 6102 and made it a federal crime to possess monetary gold. He collected it at a fixed price of $20.67 per ounce. And then, immediately, he revalued gold to $35 per ounce, a 40% devaluation of the dollar, overnight, with no warning, with no recourse. The people who had trusted the currency, who had saved in the currency, who had held their wealth in the currency, lost 40% of their real purchasing power in a single executive signature. Today, the government does not need to send agents to your door. It does not need to seize your metal. It has more elegant tools available. It can inflate away your bond holdings. It can suppress the yields on your retirement accounts. It can track every transaction you make through an increasingly digital financial system. And across the world, in China, in Europe, in dozens of central banking laboratories, the infrastructure for programmable central bank digital currency is actively being developed and piloted. A currency that can be programmed with spending conditions, expiration dates, and transaction restrictions is not money in the historical sense. It is a leash. And the leash is being built right now, sold to the public as convenience and safety, because the government understands that when the soft default becomes visible enough to frighten people, they will look for exits. The digital infrastructure is designed to close those exits before most people realize they needed one. I want to be precise about what I am telling you because precision is the only form of honesty that matters in finance. I am not telling you the system is collapsing tomorrow. I am not telling you to put everything in gold and hide in a bunker. I am telling you that the mathematics of $39 trillion in debt, $1 trillion in annual interest payments, and a Federal Reserve whose independence is being systematically pressured. Those mathematics have only one historically validated resolution. The purchasing power of the dollar will be managed steadily downward, not in a single dramatic event, in the slow, invisible, bureaucratically invisible way that robs savers over years and decades rather than days. The house prices you see rising are not measuring houses becoming more valuable. They are measuring the dollar becoming worth less. The stock market highs are not measuring a booming economy. In many cases, they are measuring a currency that purchases less than it did. The measuring stick is shrinking. What looks like growth on the surface is, in many cases, simply the growing number of a smaller unit. I want you to imagine yourself at 85 years old. You are sitting somewhere quiet and still. You cannot build anymore. You cannot recover from the decisions you did not make in 2026. You look back at this specific year, when the debt crossed 39 trillion, when interest payments exceeded the entire defense budget, when JP Morgan published research saying the exit strategy likely requires inflation and eroded Fed independence, when the historical pattern of financial repression was playing out in plain sight for anyone who chose to read it. And you ask yourself the one question that matters, not what did the market do, but what did I do with what I knew? Did I hold cash while the currency was being devalued? Did I hold bonds earning 4% in a world running at 6% inflation, believing that a positive nominal return meant safety? Did I let the comfort of familiar financial advice, work hard, save in dollars, trust the system, substitute for the uncomfortable, unglamorous, deeply necessary work of understanding what the system is actually doing to your savings? I have more money than I will ever need. I built it by understanding one principle above all others. In a world where the rules favor capital over labor, and where governments facing impossible debts historically choose inflation over honesty, the only durable protection is ownership. Ownership of productive businesses. Ownership of assets that cannot be printed. Ownership of things whose value is set by scarcity and human need, rather than by a government with a printing press and a mandate to survive. The old advice is not wrong. It is simply incomplete. Work hard, but own what you build. Save, but understand what you are saving in. Trust institutions, but read their balance sheets. The door to the cage is open. It has always been open. The cage in this case is not poverty. It is not laziness. It is the assumption that the rules you were taught still apply to the game being played right now. They do not. And the cost of that assumption is being paid, quietly, invisibly, a little more each day, by everyone who never stopped to ask why. You have today. You have right now. The question is not what the government will do. We know what they will do. The question is what you will do.